What the etymologies of our words for good and bad reveal, according to Nietzsche, is that the original system of evaluation, the original values that humanity had, were what Nietzsche calls a, a system of noble morality. Noble morality, this is Nietzsche's phrase, was the original kind of evaluation that human beings would engage in. This was the original values that human beings had created. Noble morality. Noble morality, as we are going to see, is very, very different from what we today would call morality. And in Nietzsche's view, and again, we'll talk about this in greater detail later, in Nietzsche's view, noble morality has disappeared from the face of the earth. We don't find it anymore anywhere. And the only signs that it existed really are in these, it existed a long time ago. And you can see signs of it in, for example, our words for good and bad. And so, noble morality, this is this original kind of evaluation, which has since disappeared. We'll talk about how and why it disappeared in due course. But our words, good and bad, the etymologies of those words reveal that this was the original kind of morality, the original table of values, system of values. Now, to understand Nietzsche's discussion here, it's important to understand that in Nietzsche's view, there are kind of two groups of people. So, both in this, and so a couple things here. First, when Nietzsche's kind of recounting the history um, of morality and of what has happened to our values over time, Nietzsche thinks, just as a kind of descriptive fact, that previous human societies were egalitarian. They were not egalitarian. Previous human societies um, tended to treat certain people as better than other people. There were remarkable, select individuals. Nietzsche is going to refer to these people as nobles. The vast run of humanity, however, is not like that, kind of by definition. It's simply not the case that everyone can be amazing. If everyone were amazing, no one would be amazing, right? Something like that. And so the vast majority of humanity are not nobles, they are what Nietzsche terms slaves. And so throughout this discussion, we're going to see Nietzsche talking about and contrasting nobles and slaves. He doesn't mean necessarily literal slaves and literal nobles, right? A literal noble is somebody who's been given a title by a king or queen and blah, blah, and whatever. That's not what he's talking about. Nor does he mean literal slaves, people who are literally owned or the property of somebody else. These rather are just kind of words he uses for, the nobles pick out these remarkable, strong people, something like that, and the slaves pick out everybody else, the vast majority of humanity. Now, as I was saying, when Nietzsche tells this story, or when he tells these histories, he thinks that this is just, as a matter of fact, how people viewed things for hundreds and hundreds of years. Nietzsche himself, and then obviously human beings came to think that that's not right, that we're all in some fundamental sense equal. Nietzsche disagrees with that. He does not think we are all equal. Nietzsche thinks that the way we had thought about things in terms of, certain people being remarkable, and in some sense, better than other people, Nietzsche thinks that's correct. and that we went astray in some way when we started thinking of everybody as equals. We're going to return to this later, but it's useful to know that here at the outset to kind of understand how this story is developing, how this story goes. Okay, so what is noble morality then? Well, it's this original table of values. And according to noble morality, the primary and basic evaluative concept is good. Good is the primary and basic concept of noble morality. It's how noble morality really starts. And so Nietzsche's idea is something like this. Back in the day, and he's got ancient Greece really in mind here. And so I'm going to use ancient Greek looking figures or whatever. Back in the day, you had these kind of remarkable, strong, powerful, vibrant individuals, right? These were your nobles. And these active, strong, powerful, creative individuals, they would consider what they were doing. They would think about themselves, or they would see the kinds of things that they were doing, and they would approve of them. Whenever they considered their own actions, or whenever they considered their own characteristics, they would say yes. They would affirm their power, their strength, their beauty, their creativity, their activity, right? They affirmed these things. They said yes. That's where the concept of good comes from. This yes, Nietzsche says, is the noble's creative deed. And it's out of this saying yes that the concept of goodness arises. They say yes to their own characteristics, to their own actions. And in saying yes to them, they come up with this word good. The word good it kind of contains their positive evaluation of themselves. They would call themselves and their actions and their activities and their characteristics good. They would say yes to them. They would approve them. They would affirm them. They would call them good, right? Good is a way of approving or affirming something. It's a way of saying yes to something, yes to that. Right. And so these nobles, they would consider themselves and their actions, and they would feel this impulse to approve of them, to say yes. That yes is the creative deed. It gives rise to this table of values. It gives rise to evaluating things as good. And in the first place, they evaluate themselves and their characteristics as good. Right. That's the heart of noble morality. It's a saying yes to themselves, right? And these noble people, again, are these kind of select few, these aristocratic few, these privileged few, these high-souled few, right? To pick up on the terminology related to the etymology of good, right? So hopefully you can see how those etymologies are kind of keying Nietzsche into this point. When we look at the etymology of good, what we find is that good is kind of part of a nest of concepts, or it's derived from other concepts, which all kind of refer to, these remarkable people, to having a high soul, to, the aristocratic few, to the best, to the elite, to the divinely favored, right? What those etymologies then reveal, according to Nietzsche, is something like noble morality, right? Because goodness comes from these nobles saying yes to themselves. Well, that's only half the story, because of course there's also the bad part, right? Noble morality is a good versus bad table of values. Now, on Nietzsche's telling, according to noble morality, the word bad is a kind of afterthought. It's secondary. Nobles aren't particularly concerned with it. It's not what really motivates them or occupies their attention. But what happens is these noble people, they try to stay away from the riffraff, from everybody else, the common people or whatever, but inevitably they're gonna come across common people, as Nietzsche terms them, the slaves. They come across these people who would be like, you and me, and the vast majority of humanity. And these noble people see them and see that they are in many ways the opposite of the nobles themselves, right? They are not powerful, they're not strong, they're not attractive, they're not healthy, they're not remarkable, they're not set apart, they're common and plain, unexceptional, average. And so when these nobles see these common people, these slaves, as Nietzsche terms them, they kind of, ugh, I'm glad I'm not like that. Yuck. That's vulgar and common and plain and simple and base and bad. No to that. Thank goodness I'm not like that. Right? That's where this evaluation bad comes from. And again, the etymologies should be helpful here. This is Nietzsche's point. When you trace the etymology of bad, you find that it derives from words like plain, common, simple. Nietzsche's idea is that that's because this original table of values, good versus bad, was created by these noble, remarkable few. They would say yes to themselves and then kind of no to everything that wasn't like them. So, in particular, to the slaves, right? Glad I'm not like that. Glad I don't have those characteristics. That would be bad. Like this plain, vulgar, simple, common way of life. That's bad. Glad I'm not like that. But again, Nietzsche's point, this is kind of secondary. They don't really care about it. And so nobles don't dwell on this. They just try to avoid these commoners or whatever. They don't pay much mind to them, right? They are much more interested in exercising themselves and doing their own activities and being themselves and in what's worthwhile, right? So in their view, they and their characteristics, their activities, they approve of them, they affirm them, they are worthwhile. And that's what really drives the nobles. That's what occupies the center of their attention, right? Themselves and their own actions and their own characteristics. The slaves, the common, the vulgar, the base, the common, whatever, that's an afterthought. They don't care much about it. It's secondary. They just try to avoid even thinking about them. That's noble morality.